Building better connections. Ultimately, that's what coffee origin trips are about. Going directly to the farms and mills, learning how they're doing things at the local level, and fostering relationships so that you and I can enjoy better tasting coffee and the producers can create the best outcome possible for their farms, mills, and families. In this final part of our origin trip Q&A with Sagebrush Coffee Roastery, Matt Kelso shares about his search to develop connections in Costa Rica, some key conversations with farmers and exporters, and what it was like to go on an origin trip with no set itinerary. So tell me about the decision to go to Costa Rica with no itinerary. How did that go?
I've been to Guatemala, hosted, Colombia, hosted, two very different trips. And I knew our relationships with Costa Rican farms just weren't where I wanted them to be. And so I didn't know how to fix that other than try to figure out who do I know over there. So I had two options. One, Cafe Imports was hosting a Coffee 101 trip in Costa Rica in the spring of this year that just passed. And so I reached out to Cafe Imports and said, hey, would it be cool if I came along? Do you think that'd be helpful? And their response was, no, you probably don't want to come. Like, it's too remedial. It's not really what you're trying to do. It's not a sourcing trip. It's just a one-on-one trip. And then I knew someone who I'd interacted with who was now running an export business. And he and I had lunch together like 10 years earlier. And I knew he was connected to a farm in Costa Rica. And so I just DM'd him and said, hey, I'm coming to Costa Rica. Can we meet up? And his name's Perry. He runs Selva Coffee in Costa Rica. And he was like, yeah, bro, like, come stay with us.
That's amazing.
So I'm like, okay, well, there's an entry point.
I'm going to Costa Rica.
I'm going to Costa Rica. And I also had a third kid. So I'm like, well, it's Eden's turn. And so Eden was almost 16. And
yeah.
I'm like, you want to go to Costa Rica with Dad over spring break? And she's like, yeah. So we booked tickets and flew into San Jose and kind of just tried to wing it from there. It was fun.
What was it like traveling with your daughter? Was it more of like just a vacation type of vibe, or were you going to farms?
It had a lot of a vacation vibe. Like,
yeah.
It was really, Eden and I get along really well. We just hang out, chat, like the same foods. And so there was a part of it that was just fun. Like, we got there. She kept asking me leading up to it, like, what are we going to do when we're there? I'm like, I don't know. Perry said we could stay at his farm. Let's see what that's like.
That's amazing.
And so, we flew in literally maybe 24 hours before we got there. I, rented a hotel for the first night and then knew we were going, the second day to the Donnelly farm and didn't really know what to expect with that. But they said we could stay a couple of nights, and so we figured we'd do that. And I had reached back out to Cafe Imports, and their Costa Rican arm is Oxcart. And I'd said, hey, I'm going to be there. Is there any chance you could tour us around or show us something or just give us a chance to meet people local with Costa Rica? So that's what we went into the trip with.
That's pretty cool. We'll come back to the Oxcart thing, but tell me a little bit about what it was like to go stay with Perry, who you really don't know very well. He's an exporter in the area, though, and you're going to stay at, it's not his farm, it's father-in-law's farm.
Right, yeah, it's his father-in-law's farm. So we drive in.
Do you know anything about Selva at this point? Have you bought from them?
Never bought from them. I've seen them on social media. I know it's Perry and his wife's company, and I just didn't know a lot.
So was the idea just as a place to stay, or were you trying to build a connection with the farm too?
I wanted to build a connection. Part of the DMs that Perry and I had was hey, I like to build and grow relationships with the farms. I don't know what that looks like in Costa Rica. I know you guys export. Can we just get together?
Sure.
We'll be in town. Can we come see you? And so it's funny because we drive, we flew into San Jose, spend the night, and then drove to Tarasu, which is where their farm is. And I'm DMing, and he's like, yeah, just come by our office or whatever. And so we drive by, and there's no signs on the outside. And I'm like, I think I'm in your office. And he's standing outside. He's like, I don't see you. And so we finally go in. He's like, great. And there was someone else from Maryland or someone that was also staying at the farm that day. And he's like, great, hop in our car. We're going to go visit a farm. And we're like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing.
That's so funny.
And so we went and visited a farm, and it was a farm that this guy had been working with for several years. And we chatted with him then. The other roaster was taken off. And so we went back to the family farm, to Donnelly Farm. And he showed us the bunkhouse we were staying in, which was 1,000 times worse than the bunkhouse in Guatemala. there wasn't any privacy from the bugs.
That makes it
So,
interesting, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, so it was just a different experience, and it was so sweet that they let us stay there. We ended up having dinner with them, and then the next morning they're like, "We're gonna cup some coffees. Do you want to join us?" We're like, "Yeah." Although we planned to stay 2 nights, and at some point during that night, I literally Googled like, "What's the nicest hotel in Costa Rica?" 'Cause I was like,
I'm trying to upgrade a little bit.
I probably could have done a better. I could have done a second night there, but Eden was like, "Can we just sleep in the car?" Pretty rustic for my like suburban daughter.
Fair enough.
So yeah, we cupped coffees with them, and it was great. Like, I talked a lot about like what our mission is as a company.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, well we picked some coffees we think you guys might like, or at least let us calibrate our palates together, and so you can tell me what you like and what you don't like.
Sure.
And that was just like so valuable. And then even just sitting in their office, farmers would come in and say, hey, can you measure the water content of this coffee and see how we're doing, see if it's ready for us to stop drying the coffee, and just seeing their relationships with the farms to help them, and interacting with Perry. Perry talked a lot about like how he encourages producers to think about different processing methods, because like anaerobics were all the rage recently, and so all these farmers are like, well, I'm going to make 90% of my crop anaerobic, and Perry's like, well, 90% of the coffee buying public doesn't want anaerobic. So you gotta like think through, like, so that's really what they're doing in Costa Rica, is helping the farmers figure out like, how do I maximize the profitability of these coffees while also improving like the quality of the coffee.
Yeah, that's something that I don't know, I would have thought of. You know, when you think origin trip, the first thought is to the farm itself, and you can see how developing a relationship directly with the farm is important. But to be able to meet an exporter and say, this guy has a really good connection with the local farms, I can see he's helping them understand what their consumer is looking for and helping them avoid potential pitfalls, you know. I imagine that's a really good like a relationship to develop too with an exporter in the area.
Yeah, it was great. And so we basically cupped, I don't even know, maybe 30 coffees that morning together. Most of it was me and Perry cupping coffees while Eden was watching Modern Family on my phone. And it's like it was a different trip. Like the boys were like fully invested. Eden's like, I'm here for the like food and like hanging out with Dad, but I'm not like a coffee person.
That's funny.
And so, but we cupped a bunch of coffees, and then he's like, okay, and we did that. We went to lunch together and just walked over to some restaurant that actually was run by like an expat from Philadelphia or something. And it was some of the best food we had the whole trip.
Wow.
And then we went back to his lab, and just him and a few of his employees said, okay, based on what we talked about in the morning on what we cupped, let's send Matt home with a bunch of samples. And so we came home with like 30 samples of coffees that were all kind of connected to what we decided I like, how I wanted to buy, and all this stuff. And then we were able to come back home, roast them here, and kind of know how we roast and how these coffees would apply in our roast.
Sure.
And then I reached back out and was like, okay, like, and contracted something like 50 bags worth of coffee to buy from them over the course of this year. And so that was like, I mean, that was invaluable. That 48 hours with Perry was just like changed the way we buy coffee in Costa Rica.
I was just about to say, not only are you developing a really great relationship with an exporter and with a farm, but you're also really starting to understand like what you're looking for in Costa Rican coffee, and setting up a open door for meeting other farms directly too, I imagine, right?
Oh, absolutely. And now that we have like, okay, well, these are farms we really like, we want to work with these, we go back to Costa Rica and that's like, I want to go visit those farms and interact
now
with
you
them,
can do that
and say, oh, this is what we liked about your coffee this year, this is what we did.
Sure.
And it'll really help the relationships long term. And that was it was planting a seed of long-term relationships in Costa Rica.
Long-term ROI in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Oxcart, because you mentioned it earlier. You had reached out to Onyx Coffee Lab and said, or was it Cafe Imports?
It was Cafe Imports.
Cafe Imports, and said, hey, I want to get in contact. And they said, you should talk to Oxcart. What happened there?
Yeah, so Oxcart is Cafe Imports, but it's like their exporting arm of their business.
Okay.
So they have an actual presence in Costa Rica. They have a few employees that work out of that office. And one of the employees just basically, I think she drew the short straw and had to tour us around on a Saturday. And so she reached out to a bunch of different farmers, and most farmers take Saturdays off, so they weren't really eager to meet with us. But there was a guy named Jonathan that we met who is just starting his coffee farming business, and he was so excited to tour us around. And so we met up with him at his farm in the West, like in West Valley, Costa Rica, and had lunch with him that day. So we drove out to that area of Costa Rica, had lunch with him, and then he's like, let me show you all my farms. We immediately like connected as kindred spirits because he is a doctor, and his best friend growing up owns a coffee mill and is like one of the biggest like coffee mill and coffee producers out of that area of Costa Rica.
Okay.
And so he's like growing up with these guys. It's like 7 brothers, and
Sure.
one of them is his best friend. And he's like, I want to get into coffee. Like, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. I want to get into coffee. And that resonated with me because it's like, I don't want to be an engineer anymore. I want to get into coffee. And that's how I got into coffee.
Funny.
And so he started building it like grassroots, like self-finance, self-building. So he would like find a small little piece of land, buy it, start planting coffee, and planted some like hybrid varieties that are good enough to produce. But really the key about them is they produce coffee really quickly. So he could start generating revenue so he could then go buy the next farm. And his goal, I think we toured 7 different really, really small farms, like maybe 1 hectare, like just really small farms but we toured all of them, and he showed us them. And some of them had plants that weren't bigger than 16 inches tall, already producing fruit, which is just unheard of. And so he was working with like University of San Jose, who's working on different hybrid coffee varieties to try to grow coffee so it produces fruit quickly. That's a solid cup, not like a geisha or a pacamara or something great, but it's a solid enough cup that he can sell it as specialty and not just to the co-ops.
Yeah.
And start generating business. And he took us to one piece of land that he's like, that's where my mill's going to be, that's where my house is going to be, and that's where I'm going to start a family. And he's like got this vision of what he wants it all to be. And it was really cool to see him. I asked him where he was at, and I think he's been doing it for, it's been too long. I think it was like 7 years. I'm like, well, how long till you're like where you want to be? And he's like, 5 more years. And he has a plan lined up on every single thing. He's getting like the biggest lead item is getting approval from the country to be able to build his mill. And and he's like right there on the cusp of it. And so it was really cool to just interact with him and go tour all of these farms that day and just walk the properties to see what he was building.
What are the odds that you go to Costa Rica with basically just one connection and then you meet your Costa Rican doppelganger?
I mean, zero. The odds are 0. It was crazy. Like even that, like we went to one farm and he's like, this is actually a co-op farm. And his goal in building the mill is there's so many producers all over the place that are not producing that great of coffee, and so they're selling to the co-ops.
Sure.
And so he wants to elevate all the coffee in that area.
Oh,
and so
wow.
It's really exciting. Like right now, frankly, we're probably not going to buy a lot of coffee from him because it's just not as high a quality as we usually buy.
Mm-hmm.
I might buy a small lot here or there just to help support him because I love what he's doing.
Sure.
But his goal is to elevate coffee in that area. So even though 5 years is before it's like his full-time gig, in 10 years, he's setting the groundwork for now, is going to produce some of the best coffee out of Costa Rica. And West Valley, Costa Rica is going to just be put on the map in a different way.
Wow.
And so it was exciting to see this guy just like, this is my dream and this is where I'm going and let me show you it.
That's pretty amazing. Another great example of you never know what to expect when you go on an origin trip, it sounds like. Each trip for you has been a little bit different, but always rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done 3 now. I can't imagine how a 4th one could be that much different than these 3 because like each one was just so incredibly unique. I mean, most of the trip in Costa Rica was Eden and I in our car with her directing me through traffic. Like we literally were like on Waze because that's what I heard was the way to get around Costa Rica. And there's one point where she's like, you need to turn right here. And I'm like, well, that's a cliff. The bridge doesn't exist.
That is
like,
so funny.
We got to turn around and figure out where else we go because the bridge is gone. So it was like in terms of like father-daughter bonding, it was awesome.
Yeah,
and
she's not going to forget that trip.
No. And relationship building with producers.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about what's next when it comes to origin trips.
Take opportunities when they come up. I probably would have gone to Peru last week, except Jonathan got married. So that changed
Your son.
my plans. Yeah, my son Jonathan, not Jonathan.
Not your doppelganger.
It seems to me that most of the coffee travel season is in the spring. So last year, I was looking at going to Panama because we have a really strong relationship with the Altieri family in Panama and trying to visit them. We bought from them for 4 or 5 years now. We talked about going to El Salvador for the same reason. We have a really strong relationship with Loma La Gloria and want to go see their farm. I want our baristas here to see some of what I've seen And so I would love for, if that Coffee 101 trip to Costa Rica happens again next year, like I'm going to send some baristas.
That would
Because
be
I think
really
that's a
cool.
big piece of what we as an organization just embrace, this like origin trip. And so I want to be able to send people.
It sounds like you're diving full in when it comes to origin trip. What would you say to another coffee roaster who's considering this? Or what would you just say in general about what coffee roasters should be considering about origin?
Well, our mission, I think it predates us going to Guatemala, but it was like we fully embraced our mission, which is to put on display the hard work of the producers in our coffee. And because that's our mission, a part of that is because when we see what the work that happens at Origin, like it should humble you as a coffee roaster. Because at the end of the day, you're roasting for 15 minutes and saying, okay, look at me. Like this is Sagebrush coffee. We did this for 15 minutes. And you've got people behind you in that supply chain that have dedicated their lives to this.
Yeah.
And
Generations.
not that I haven't, but like it's generations. And the amount of work they put in for that cup of coffee is so much more than my 15 minutes of roasting. So
Sure.
I really want to like illuminate what happens behind me in the supply chain. And so I think that any other coffee roaster, if they're out there and saying, oh man, like I love this industry and I want to learn how to support it better, you go to Origin and it will just open your eyes up to how big coffee is across the planet.
And when it comes to consumers, what would you say to consumers why this is so important?
I mean, we've talked about transparency some. We're all focused on like conscientious buying. It's easy for people to just say, oh yeah, don't worry, the farmers are getting their fair share. But to have people who are going there, talking to the farmers, understanding, like Jonathan, not my son Jonathan, my doppelganger, he grew up in West Valley, Costa Rica. He wants to see his area grow.
Right.
And he's excited about that. Like to be able to know those stories and connect that to the cup of coffee you have every morning, it just tastes better.
It's easy to see from mass travels to Guatemala, Colombia, and Costa Rica that origin trips have the potential to drastically impact a coffee roaster's purchasing habits, improve farmers' practices, and change the economic outcome of locals for the better. And consumers purchasing from roasters who have been to Origin can expect greater traceability and rest assured that their money is well spent and going to the right place. Sagebrush takes pride in putting on display the hard work of our producers, so you can enjoy the best coffee possible. If you enjoyed this coffee Q&A, let us know in the comments, share it with a coffee-loving friend, and keep an eye out for our climate change Q&A.